Our presenter today is Dr. Jean Dement. Dr. Dement is a professor emeritus at Duke School of Medicine and has been involved in the surveillance of the BTMed program that we're going to be talking about today for many years. So thank you for joining us today, John, and I will hand it over to you for the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jessica, and welcome those who are on the call. What I'm going to report on today is a cohort mortality study of BTMed participants. I'll say from the outset, this is the third mortality update of this cohort. We've been trying to do this about every 5 years or so. First, I want to give a little bit of overview of what BTMed is for those who may not be familiar with it. It's a service program. It's centered in the Center for Center for Construction Worker and Research and Training, CPWR. And the PI for this project is Dr. Knut Ringen, and the director for CPWR is Patricia Quinn. And I'd like to acknowledge the many, many contributions to this program over the past 20 plus years by current and former participants in the program and those who are managing the program. The BTMed, or the former worker screening programs, were created in 1996. They're funded by the Department of Energy. The screening programs are at no cost to workers. BTMed currently covers 35 sites, and that's increased over years as the program has grown and expanded. Over 38,000 screenings have been completed by BTMed, and that includes about over 23,000 individual workers. Workers can come back for rescreens periodically. This is just a map showing the sites. As you can see, it's pretty broadly dispersed across the U.S. Some concentration in sort of the northeast, but the program covers the U.S., which creates a good dynamic for the program in terms of diversity, some challenges for the program too with regard to program administration. As I said before, it's a service program. The purpose is to identify individuals who might have a health impact from the work on the DOE side. The screening exams include a number of different components, some tailored to exposures reported by workers. Obviously, a medical and occupational history, a comprehensive physical exam, labs that are in some ways tailored to the individual, spirometry, hearing test, and chest x-rays. Workers at the sites have a lot of exposures. Many of the exposures are common to the construction trades, obviously asbestos, noise, silica, solvents, as well as some of the metals, cadmium and chromium. There are some exposures, of course, that are unique to DOE sites, and those would include both inhaled and external radiation. A number of health effects are the target of the program, obviously much concentrated on respiratory diseases. The BTMed covers a broad spectrum of building and construction trades. Some of those are listed on the slide. I'll also say that there are other individuals that participate in BTMed that are not construction trade workers. Those are welcome to come to the program. For example, we do include in the program a number of individuals who are, quote, scientific or technical individuals, as well as individuals that might be in other positions such as security, fire protection, etc. As I said before, what we're reporting on is the third update of this cohort. The last published update was in 2015. The new study increased the sample size considerably, and it also extended the follow-up an additional 5 years through 2016. The report that I'm giving today has been published recently, and this is a citation for the publication if you're interested in going and find it. The individuals who participated in developing the manuscript are listed on the slide, and I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors on this study. A little bit about the nuts and bolts of how it was done. The cohort was defined as workers who completed at minimum a work history interview through December of 2016. The reason most workers who complete the interview also go on to complete an exam. About 92% of individuals who do an interview do an exam within about a year. The median time between their interview and their exam is 54 days, and 75% complete the exam within 104 days. So we have a high rate of participation for those who do the work history. The cohort included all sites covered by BTMed. It was restricted a little bit to those who had enough demographic data needed for vital status ascertainment through the NDI. There was only about 1% that were excluded because of lack of things like a date of birth or social security number. The NDI provided follow-up through to December of 2016. NDI is a very complete system of vital status and death ascertainment in the U.S. So for this cohort, workers not deceased through the NDI were assumed to be alive. We use the NDI plus system, which gives us the causes of death by ICD code. In this case, because we're mostly post-1999, the codes are ICD-10 codes. A little bit about the methods. This is, again, a cohort mortality study in which we calculate expected deaths and compare them to observed deaths by cause. For the analytical portion of this, we use the NIOSH life table analysis system, the most current one available at the time we did this work, which stratifies causes of death into 119 different causes. It groups them into those causes. So it applies death rates to person years within our cohort. So person years for each individual began at the completion of the work history or at the first BTMed exam. Again, about 92% of individuals also who did the work history also completed an exam. One reason for including those who only did the work history was to avoid potential selection bias, and that is perhaps individuals who didn't do the exam were either more well or perhaps even more sick than those who completed the exam. So those who did the work history were included. So expected deaths were calculated through the NIOSH system by application of age, gender, race, and calendar time-specific death rates to the cohort person years. So in a cohort study like this, the outcome is the standardized mortality ratio, or the SMR. And it's simply the observed to expected deaths. In this case, we just multiply them by 100 to round it to a whole number. So a value of 1 would be deaths that were equivalent to expectation. A value greater than 1 would be an excess. Less than 1 would be a deficit compared to the U.S. general population. We also calculated cause-specific SMRs by DOE site trade and DOE first DOE work periods. This is what our cohort looks like. The cohort included over 24,000 individuals. And of those 24,000 followed through to the NDI, we identified 52,003 deaths. The mean age at entry, this is an older population. These are mostly former construction workers and DOE workers, was a little over 60 years. On average, they had been employed at DOE about 10 years, a little over 10 years. The cohort is predominantly male, 93%, and it's predominantly white, 87%. A little over 2% are non-white. First, to look at the all-cause mortality by age at cohort entry. What you'll see is that the all-causes SMRs are not really excess until after about 50 years of age. Then after that, they're relatively constant. We observed an overall increased overall mortality of about 9% in this cohort. This is a little different than we've typically seen, and I've typically seen in cohort studies, where workers might exhibit a healthy worker or a healthy worker survivor effect. That is, they tend to be a little more healthy than the comparison general population. But we did see an overall excess of all causes of mortality. This is just, let me back up. This is a summary of some of the cancer causes that we saw in excess. Again, the all causes I'm going to show in every slide just for comparison. But we saw an increased risk for all cancers of about 24%, and that was significant. The all cancers mortality increase, if you look at the causes, is dispersed along a lot of different categories of cancer sites. Some of them are smaller numbers and don't achieve statistical significance, but in general, the direction that we see for the all cancer increase is pretty consistent with the causes that are considered compensable under the DOE compensation program for former workers. We saw a significant increased risk for lung cancer of about 40%. We saw also a 39% increased risk in kidney cancer, and we also saw a very large increase of over six-fold increase in mesothelioma. Of course, the lung cancers and mesothelioma are indicative of asbestos exposures plus other lung carcinogens in this population. For lymphatic and hematopoietic cancers, we saw an overall excess of about 25%. And I've shown in this slide the distribution by subcategories. What you see is that the subcategories in themselves didn't achieve statistical significance, but the direction is the same as the overall excess in this broad category. A little bit more about some other conditions. We saw an increased risk in transportation-related injuries of about SMR of about 1.6, 60% excess. This is sort of consistent with some of NIOSH's emphasis on workers that are mobile. That is, they might go from site to site. This is certainly true of construction workers. We also saw an increased risk of about a little over 60% for accidental poisoning. The NIOSH life table doesn't really allow that to be broken out into great detail, but we did look at the ICD codes within this category. And what we see of the 41 deaths, 19 were assigned to a category that would be suspicious for drugs and medications. 16 were for narcotics, and 3 were assigned to alcohol-related deaths. We feel that this finding is pretty consistent with some work that shows that construction workers are experiencing the same opioid increased mortality as the other populations. And study, I think it came out of Massachusetts, specifically noted that construction workers had a significant excess risk of opioid-related deaths. As I said before, we stratified results by trade to the extent trades had enough deaths to really allow stratification. So in this slide, this shows causes that were significant in the other slides, but stratified by trade. It's restricted to trades that had at least 200 deaths. The others are just listed in the all those other trades category. So if you look at all cancers, what you see is, again, we had about a 24% increased risk of all cancers, and the risk is really reasonably consistent across trades. Some were significant, others not, but the direction is always the same. Lung cancer is the same way. Overall, about a 40% increase, and again, that seems to be distributed across trades. Perhaps sheet metal workers a little bit higher, but they're really not significantly higher than the other trades. Mesothelioma, same way. We did not see, however, a mesothelioma death among operating engineers. The numbers are small. We would expect probably less than one. COPD is a major cause of disability and mortality among this population. We saw an overall increased risk of COPD about 46%. It's a little higher than the lung cancer excess. And again, the COPD risk is pretty well distributed across these trades. Just to continue the same slide, in this slide we're showing the kidney cancers and the hematopoietic system cancers. Kidney cancers, the numbers are small. We have 49 total cancers. Pretty well distributed across the trades. The numbers are too small to really go further than just stratifying by trades. We haven't done any more analytical work to look at relationships with kidney cancer. We may do that in a later follow-up. Again, the lymphatic and hematopoietic cancers are distributed across trades, again, reasonably well. We did not see excesses in this category among laborers and sheet metal workers. However, if you look at the numbers in the brackets, sheet metal workers, the expected deaths were only 5. So we really can't say much with regard to a real deficit there. We also stratified the results by time since first DOE work. The DOE sites have progressed over years with regard to their occupational safety and health programs, particularly with regard to the non-radiation related issues. Most of the programs really didn't get developed until maybe the late 70s, early 80s, maybe even later. And so we stratified our results, at least by cause, across time since first entry into the DOE site work. What we see is that the all causes excess continues at least through 1989. It's about expectation for those who enter after 1990. Word of caution, I guess, our data gets pretty thin with regard to those who enter after 1990. Most of our workers have been at work at DOE sites much earlier. Same sort of trend with lung cancer. It's sort of consistent that we don't see much drop in lung cancer until after 1990, and it's a little bit excess with only 42 deaths. Mesothelioma is the same way. We only have 1 death since 1990 in our population. COPD continues to be at increased risk. It's SMR of 1.25, 25% excess, but it's only based on 25 observed deaths. So again, I think we can speak with more confidence before 1990. Our data at this point are relatively thin after 1990. I want to just compare the follow-up. As I mentioned at the outset, the cohort has been updated and followed in 3 different times. And in this slide, I compare 2016 to the former cutoff date of 2011. And what you see, if you look across the causes, all causes, we saw a 6% in 2011. We see a 9% now, so that's pretty consistent. The all cancers is also consistent in the same order of magnitude, 1.24, 1.29. And again, if you just look down the different columns, you see that we're seeing pretty consistent results as we follow this cohort forward in time. We're seeing a little bit increase in the asbestosis and other pneumoconiosis, but we're seeing consistent results. The asterisk on the slide shows those that were increased in the 2011 but did not achieve statistical significance. So as we've gone forward, for example, our kidney cancer was a little bit excess in 2011. It achieved significant excess in 2016. I also wanted to make one note here. You know, in terms of respiratory diseases, we have a total observed of 732 deaths, about a 45% increase currently in our last follow-up. COPD really drives the respiratory disease excess in our population. We talk a lot about asbestosis and silicosis and other pneumoconioses, but COPD is really driving the excess mortality based on sheer numbers in this cohort. A few conclusions. The construction workers at DOE sites have a significant risk of occupational illnesses. We've shown that in both this study. We've published other studies where we've looked at respiratory diseases in more detail. We've looked at COPD in a case control study. So respiratory diseases continue to be a major concern, as well as all cancers. The risk associated with employment during all time periods are increased, and possibly after 1990, but as I've said before, our data became relatively thin after 1990. The risk of all cancers combined pretty closely matches those identified in the DOE compensation program for radiation exposures. So we saw about 24% increase in all cancers. The increased risk of lung cancer was significant in 2011. It's pretty consistent in 2016, and it really supports early detection to find cancers that are early enough to be treated. BTMed began offering low-dose CT in 2011, and that program continues. As I've said before, COPD is an important risk for construction workers. Smoking, of course, is a major risk factor for COPD, and smoking cessation programs are important for these workers as well as others who are smokers. I note here, though, that most of our workers are older. The current smoking prevalence in our population as they come to us is only about 20%, so it's pretty consistent with the trends in the U.S. There are a lot of former smokers in our program. Our other research within this population supports important contributions for occupational exposures to vaporous gas, dust, and fumes. Our estimation is about 20, perhaps to 25% of the excess COPD in this population is attributable to occupational exposures. And I think that completes my presentation, formal presentation. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
All right, thanks, John. I'm going to give it a minute to see if we get any questions entered. None so far. I just want to mention to everyone, we've had more people join since my introduction. I will be sending out a PDF of the slides and the recording So if you do have questions after the event, you can always respond to that email, and I can put you in touch with John for follow-up. Okay. It doesn't look like we have anything. So thanks again, John, for oh, sorry, hang on. We just got a question. Do we have any data of colon cancer mortality rates among construction workers?
We do not see an excess of colon cancer in our population. I have seen, in another study that was published a number of years ago, we did look at carpenters, and we did see a slight increase in colorectal cancer in carpenters. That's been hypothesized to result from some occupational exposures, perhaps to things like asbestos that are deposited in the upper respiratory system and then cleared and become a GI insult. But we didn't see that in our population. I think also a lot of the studies have shown an increased risk with this of colorectal cancer with asbestos exposures have been in populations where the lung cancer excess is well over twofold and perhaps higher. We saw a slight increase in colorectal cancer, but it was not significant.
Just in follow-up to that, what about urinary bladder cancer, specifically asking among roofers?
We did not see that in our population. There's a greater breakdown in discussion of that in the actual publication. We looked at by trade we looked at causes of death by trade only among those in great detail for trades that had 2 or more deaths. However, we went back through all of the trades to find out if there were any sites that might have been excess that weren't excess overall in our population. And I don't recall offhand that the roofers had an excess of bladder cancer. But I would suggest looking at the published manuscript. If it's there, we would have listed it.
Okay, we're getting a couple of questions about the manuscript, and I forgot to mention that I will actually include a link to that. It is available online through the journal. So when I send out everything else, the slides and recording, I will also include a link to the report that John has shared with me. Just in follow-up to that, with regard to roofers, aren't there few roofers in the cohort, limited number of roofers?
There are roofers in the cohort. I don't have that number offhand. Again, that would be in, I think it's in the actual publication.
Okay. And is there a correlation between cancer cases and years of service at the work site?
The years of service at the work site, we have stratified it in a rough way. Generally, for individuals who have 5 or more years of work at the DOE sites, we're seeing the significant increase in the lung cancer risk. We have another manuscript that's under review in which we'll look at that a bit more in detail. But yeah, there's some correlation. Time of employment, duration of employment is in many cases a pretty weak surrogate for exposures, especially for those individuals who might have multiple different exposures. And I think particularly for our population where we have multiple different trades, so it's a surrogate. It's not a great one.
Okay. Do you also have in the manuscript information on brain cancer included? Yeah,
there's to the extent that an NIOSH system breaks up brain cancer, we have in the manuscript a more detailed table that shows all of the 119 causes of death and what we observed and what was expected. So we have SMRs for those in the larger manuscript.
Okay. Can you discuss how these observations do and do not relate to the construction industry in general?
Good question. What we find, we collect information, detailed information about tasks that these individuals do in the occupational history. And the tasks that these workers do on DOE sites is the same task in many cases that it would do on other construction sites. So in our view, we feel that for the most part, the results here are indicative of construction workers more generally.
Do you have any study or findings on Parkinson's disease?
We are currently sort of looking at that in more detail. I don't recall that we saw an increased risk of Parkinson's in the actual cohort. I can actually pull that up pretty quickly, I think. But the hang on, I can quickly pull up the SMR that we saw in that category. Okay, I got it up. For the overall category of hang on a second. With regard to bladder cancer, the question was, did we see an excess? We actually saw the SMR is 0.88. There's no excess of bladder cancer in this particular population. It's grouped together in a NIOSH in its bladder and urinary sites. For brain and nervous system, we observed 30, expected about 28. The SMR is 1.06. There was no increased risk of brain cancer in our population. With regard to I don't think it's in this table. I don't think we actually have seen an increased risk in Parkinson's overall, but it's not in this particular table.
Okay. Great. I think that was our last question. So thank you so much for going through and pulling up that information. And again, if anyone has questions once they've received the report, we're happy to answer them in follow-up. I did just get one final question. Does the report iterate what was just stated in regards to all construction? How it compares? Yeah. Does the report include or reiterate what was just stated in regards to all construction? I think your comments on how these observations relate to construction in general.
I think I would just say the construction trades that we've looked at. I think, and we've looked at the cohort includes a broad spectrum of construction-related trades. So I think, I don't want to go beyond what we have. I think our data are certainly informative of risk of construction workers more generally, and I'll put the caveat, of course, to say that to the extent they're included in our cohort.
Okay. And there is some explanation of that in the manuscript?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Then I'm going to bring us to a close, and I will hopefully get out the recording to you, if not by Friday, then early next week. But feel free to follow up with me at any point in time. And thanks, John, again, for doing this presentation.
Thank you.
Take care.